I grew up in faraway Rockaway, New York. Rockaway, originally named Rockaway by Indian tribes. When I was a young girl, my sister Patty, who was sleeping on the bunk above, was crying in the middle of the night. She said she saw someone standing by the bed and was frozen with terror. She distinctly remembers seeing this figure wearing a brownish red robe and what looked like an eye missing, only it wasn't a vacant space. There was literally a black hole, where an eye was supposed to be. Everything else was illuminated, compared to the area of where the missing eye was. A few days later, and being the curious kids we were, I wanted to get a Ouija board so we could get confirmation and answers as to what the spirit was, but Patty refused. She said she didn't want anything to do with the spirit. I decided to take the Ouija board out anyway. She wouldn't even look at the board. So I put my hands on the planchet, and what happened was either the biggest of coincidences, or we were summoning spiritual activity. My other sister, who was also there, refused because she knew that messing with the Ouija board was always a bad idea. Then, the landline phone we had in the room started ringing. I hesitantly rushed to pick it up, say hello, but there was no voice on the other end. For 2 minutes this went on, and you could actually hear that there was someone on the other line, but it was silent. Very light breathing sounds, almost as if someone was trying to speak, but couldn't. A few more seconds go on, and the line on the phone gets a busy signal. A couple years after that, my sister Patty woke up screaming out of nowhere. When we asked her what was wrong, she looked delirious, as if she had no idea what was going on. I asked her if she may have had nightmares or something, but she said she couldn't give me an answer because she didn't think anything bad happened. I think she thought we were just messing with her or something, so I told her once more, "You screamed in your sleep." That was when it really sank in that I was being serious. She told me that there was definitely something in this room where we always slept, something very dark that we shouldn't mess around with. My other sister said a ghost attached herself to Patty, the spirit that she saw at the end of her bed. This really started to affect Patty for a while. A couple of days later, she said she had a dream of a dark figure slowly moving around the room in a cabin. At first, this figure wasn't even a person. It was just a dark cloud. Then it moved into the corner of the cabin and appeared to be a silhouette of a woman, crouching down in a fetal position. Then, she hears a loud guttural sobbing, as if this being in the dream was being tortured or suffering greatly. My sister woke up screaming once again and told us what happened. I think from then on she was convinced that there was some sort of haunting there. She couldn't sleep and was so upset, no matter how many times my other sister and I tried to comfort her. She talked about it for days. Some 8 years later or so, I was reading a book about apparitions on Long Island. It was full of stories about Native American sightings. I suddenly remembered my sister's experience and how insistent she was. On a hunch, I wrote her an email and innocently asked her if she remembered the time she saw a lady standing by her bed, or if she still remembers the dreams and Ouija board incident with the phone. At the time, I didn't mention the book I was reading, nor did I tell her why I was asking. When I received her reply, I closed my email. I was so stunned. She wrote, "I'll never forget the time I saw the lady standing by the bed. Of course, she had the black hole of an eye and the red and brown robe, but she also had long, black braids." I believe she saw someone. This past weekend, I went to Spokane Valley to visit a friend. She informed me of the Spokane Valley Cemetery. I read about the 1,000 staircase, and I felt like that could be a good challenge. We got there in the middle of the day, and we could just feel the vibe there, and it was anything but good. The cemetery is in 3 levels, with some parts older than the other. There was one spot where the cemetery was unkept and very worn by time, which was also where the young and sick were buried. Still, every time we were in this particular area, we felt a kind of dread and sickness that we couldn't comprehend ourselves. In fact, anybody who went into the area of the cemetery felt the very same way. You'd hear distant voices that sounded like they were far away, and in my case, a crying sound that always seemed to be coming from the bushes behind the cemetery. It was creepy. Anyway, this particular time we were sitting there in the car, when all of a sudden, the car went on by itself. We couldn't even explain it at all, and it was quite terrifying. My friend's foot was nowhere near the gas. I thought that maybe it was just the car rolling, but then it started to accelerate a little. Whoever was there at that moment certainly volunteered us to leave without our permission. We drove on the other side of the road where the cemetery was more modern. You could sense the change in the air, much more peaceful and calm, almost a welcoming feeling, unlike the other side, where it is cold and bone-chilling. I was trying to find the staircase, which I found camouflaged in the trees off the side of the road. It definitely wasn't 1,000 steps, but certainly was a lot of them. I got out of the car and immediately felt a chill, as if to warn me not to go further. The thing is, I'm in the Navy and I have Irish in my blood, so I'm a very stubborn man. That mixed with the curiosity, I climbed up the stairs. Each time I made it to a landing, I wanted to turn and leave, but I wanted to reach the top. I made it all the way to the top to what looked like a crypt. That was when I saw a shadow person moving in front of the crypt, with the crypt itself a small distance from where I was standing at the top of the landing. I bolted back down the stairs and got back to the car. I told my friend we should go back to see if it will appear, for confirmation, and so I don't look crazy. We both went back up there and saw an orb this time, after waiting a few minutes. We didn't see the shadow person, but I think my friend ended up believing me. I've always been a big believer in the paranormal, and I've been lucky enough to have ghostly experiences in the past. I thought it was about time I shared a couple of my stories with a larger audience, as I really feel I've kept them in for too long. Experience number 1. I'm from a little town in the northeast of England called Hartlepool, part of County Durham, which has been an established town for over 1,000 years, as it was once one of the main seaports in the country. There are plenty of ghostly stories and tales repeated around the area, from the ghostly farmer who skis corn in the farmlands area of the town, to the ethereal monks whose chanting and voices are heard on the site of an old monastery. The event that occurred to me in Hartlepool is a different kettle of fish, so to speak. It was the day of my final exams at secondary school, high school, and I decided to retreat to an old art classroom at the top of the building, as I knew I could get peace and quiet while I tried to revise. My school isn't particularly old, and as I'd never had any experiences before, I felt content and calm. I settled down to read through my notes when a few minutes later, I heard a sound. Looking up, the noise stopped as suddenly as it started. Thinking no more of it, I once again started the read, only for the noise to occur again. Only this time, It didn't stop. What I could hear were the footsteps right in front of me, footsteps I took to be from a little girl, as they were small and soft, and the definite sound of a high heel could be heard. I was in shock and kept thinking I was imagining it, or the sound was coming from outside the class. But as it continued, I knew it was only a matter of meters away and was getting closer. Suddenly it stopped, and a feeling that I was being observed swept over me. I sat in total shock as the footsteps started again, but they soon got lighter and lighter until they stopped once and for all. Looking back, I now realize it never scared me, more that I was enthralled and ruptured, then petrified. The sound was definitely coming from my right in front of me. There is no doubt about that. It lasted for about 20 to 25 seconds, which gave me enough time to hear and determine where it was coming from. The strangest, yet most fascinating part was that when I explained my story to my teacher, who had worked at the school for around 25 years, he told me that I wasn't the only one to have experienced this event, and that 2 cleaners had even seen the little girl. I felt privileged to have had such an experience. Experience number 2. A few years ago, I went on a lad's holiday to Portugal for a week or two of being merry and having a really good time, and to get me away from the bleakness of England. After several days and nights of hard drinking, me and a friend decided to take a break to spend the night in, playing cards and having a good chat. After a while, we both felt tired and retired to our beds, which happened to be in the same room, and I soon felt myself drifting off to sleep. However, around an hour later, I woke up with a start. I could hear voices, but in my grogginess, I couldn't even tell what the voices were saying. I sat back and listened to these voices until I could take in what was going on. To my astonishment, the voices weren't talking, but singing. As I sat and listened, I could tell the language was Portuguese, and rather that 1 or 2 people were singing, it was a whole choir. They all sounded young, boys and girls mixed in together, but they had the voices of angels. I sat listening to this beautiful music for a while, and then turned my head to the side to observe my friend, and to see if he was awake. His eyes were open with an astonished look on his face, and he turned to me and said, "Can you hear that?" To which I replied, "Yeah, I can." He got up and looked out of the bedroom door, and then out of the window, and remarked that if he stepped into the living room, he could hardly hear the voices, but as soon as he went back into the bedroom, they were loud and clear again. We both wondered where the singing was coming from, as we were staying in the isolated villa with no one around us for miles, until we both decided that there was no rational explanation, and that what we were hearing was paranormal. Taking into account that was the early hours of the morning, just what was going on? After a while, the voices got fainter and fainter until they just faded away. I never heard the ghostly choir again for the rest of the holiday, and me and my friend decided to keep the experience to ourselves. However, on the plane back to England, one of our friends remarked about the singing he had heard on the last night, and if anyone else had heard it. At this, another friend also said he'd heard it, and he had also woken up to find a young girl at the foot of the bed. I've no doubt that the villa in Portugal was haunted, and I once again feel privileged to have experienced something out of the world. Thank you for your time. It's no secret that in my youth, I loved to hike or explore the woods nearby my family home. After we moved out of the duplex neighborhood, my parents moved us into our first home, a nice plot of land on the corner of the street, the largest yard in the neighborhood, a neighborhood at the time that was surrounded by underdeveloped wooded land. thick trees, with the abundance of the sounds of cars and such. So naturally, I had to explore the new land. This was the beginning of my high school years, so it was like starting a new life after getting this new home. My dogs loved it, especially when I would take them through the woods with me. The smallest of my dogs, Rory, loved hiking with me, and I trusted his instincts and nose when it came to trouble. This particular day, I decided to venture a little further into the underdeveloped areas of our new neighborhood. I guess the company that bought the land kind of ran out of money and left this part of the road up for grabs. It was a paved street that was blocked off by a street out sign like a roadblock. It didn't work too well. Some kids who would drive would sneak their cars through and use the empty back road for other recreational means. So it was easy for a young teenager like myself at the time to roll in on his mountain bike. Rory trotted closely behind me eagerly. We would travel a bit down the road, stopping to check out a creek nearby and possible trails to mark. Now, from what I am told, this entire plot of land the neighborhood now sits on belonged to one family. They then sold it to realtors. But since the land was basically open, it was also used for hunting. I would find old rickety wooded hunter towers built into the trees and whatnot. They were so old though, it looked like they haven't been used in years, but it was still cool to explore. Rory and I sped our way to the end of the road where it turned into a somewhat court. At the end of the road, a small creek cut through the roads right by a clearing. I couldn't get past the thick bush to reach the clearing, so I dropped my bike and continued on foot. Rory followed and would occasionally dart ahead to sniff things out. It turns out the clearing was an incomplete lot for our house, but the trail Rory and I found kept passing through, and we followed it casually. The trees seemed to get taller and deeper into the woods that we got. Then one spot ahead of us caught my attention. It looked so surreal that I couldn't believe it was in the woods. Rory and I approached the spot, and I noticed the trees in the spot were all dead. Not just dead as in no leaves, but dead as in no leaves, and completely stone gray. I stood there, trying to understand what I was looking at. There were 5 tall trees in what I could tell was a perfect circle. In the circle were leaves, just like in the rest of the woods. They were just as dead and gray as the trees, and the trees were gray, all the way up as far as I can see. Rory sat at the outside edge of the gray circle. I decided I wanted a clear look at the strange small plot of land, and stepped into the circle. The leaves cracked and squished loudly as I stepped in. The air seemed cooler than the rest of the wooded land, and the sound seemed to just stop. All I could hear was my leaf-crunching footsteps and Rory's whining. I looked back at Rory to call him to me, but he just sat there on the outer edge watching me. It was very strange and stagnant. I slowly sifted through the leaves on the ground and found some old rotting 2x4s covered by a layer of rusting chicken wire. I tried lifting the debris, but it was thick, and the noise the leaves made were so loud, it was almost disorienting. Rory whined and lightly whipped at me, so I decided to follow his advice and back off. We left that spot intact and avoided it in the years that came. I would sometimes walk by the spot on the road to see if there was any change. I could see the dead trees sitting there, as though they wait for me to venture out there once more, but I never took another step closer, especially after Rory died of old age. Now for the ghost story associated for what happened inside that circle. One night I was walking there, and it was pretty bright enough to see what was going on. In that circle, I noticed that there was a ghost standing there inside the circle from the distance. Me and Rory approached the guy, or whatever being it was standing in the circle, and he slowly faded away. He was as solid as you and I were, but it was so shockingly creepy. The weirdest thing about it was, the guy had a stone stare, and it was completely and utterly disgusting. Anyway, now several years much later, that part of my parents' neighborhood is completely developed. Houses decorate the once empty back road, as this remote neighborhood is now a fully active suburb. I went back to find the spot a few years back. I'd say about 5 years ago. Now where the dead gray spot used to be, and that strange figure inside the circle, a cute 2-story house sits there. Now, I'm not sure what that spot was, nor do I have any speculation of what it is, but what I do know is that nobody has lived in that cute little house for too long. Whenever my wife and I would visit my folks, we would walk past a lot and see it was up for sale. Every single time. I sure wonder if that figure that haunts the house is still there, inside the house, wondering why someone took up their area. Pretty short story, but I think stories don't always need to be long to be as terrifying as this one is. My big old house is situated just east of town about 4 miles, and was built around 1860 or before. We moved in when my boys were small. The youngest one was about 15 before he shared with any of us what he saw in the doorway of his room every night, a woman in a white dress. He also saw a man in a brown suit bent over his brother's bed with his hands raised and shaped like claws, reaching towards the sleeping brother. There were guests that also woke up one night and saw that man bent over the crib of their small child. My mother also watched a woman holding a child follow my brother into the living room one day. For the most part, I don't seem to be sensitive to their presence, just a tingling skin once in a while. But I was a little shook one evening, while home alone, when a book flew off the shelf. When I mustered up enough courage to walk over and pick it up, I noticed that the cover showed a woman in a long white wedding dress. I think everyone has seen things out of the corner of their eyes, only to focus on it and see nothing. I myself tend to blow light bulbs, at least 3 a week, usually more. They flare up into purplish blue flame-like bursts and make a loud popping sound. The unusual thing about this is that I'm either tense or stressed, or I'm entering an all-dark room and get an odd feeling right before I switch the lamp on. It's always lamps. But the odd experience I'd like to recount for you is concerning my 2.5-year-old daughter. She was born in ECAL, or with a cow, water sacked intact around her. In other words, she came out in sort of a water bubble. I've read that supposedly this condition denotes a child who has second sight, or some type of clairvoyance. Then my doctor mentioned this folklore to me, and told me to keep him informed. My daughter is a fiery, red-headed child. She is a wonderful child, just extremely willful and spirited, all the qualities that drive a parent crazy, but will hopefully make a good adult. Anyway, my daughter usually ends up sleeping in my bed between her dad and I, and refuses to go to bed unless I join her. So early one morning, we were climbing into bed, I with my back to the window, facing towards her, and her daddy, who was pretty much passed out. She sat up suddenly and pointed at the window behind me. "That's a guy, Mama," she says. I sleepily ask her what. Then she says, "That's a guy, ouchie head guy." I froze immediately awake. "What did you just say?" I ask, trying not to alarm creep into my voice. I nudged my husband awake and said, "Tell Daddy what you said." She says, "Look, Daddy, that's an ouchy head guy." Then she laid down to sleep. I just sat there, locked eyes with my husband's, unable to turn around. I didn't feel particularly cold or the feeling of being watched. I knew by the look on my husband's face that there wasn't anything behind me but the thickly curtained window. Then, around 3 days later, while we were in the living room, she pointed into the corner behind the front door, which was closed, and said, "Ouchie head guy" again. Of course, there wasn't anything there, or was there, but the suddenness of this was startling. 1 minute she was sitting on the floor playing, and then she turned and pointed, almost behind her, and said this. This happened around 6 months ago. My daughter just turned 3 years old in August, and my grandmother died nearly a week later. My daughter had only seen her like twice, both times in a nursing home for brief visits, other than times when she was a small baby. She didn't know her, and only recognized her as Grandma because that's what I call her. Anyway, one day, within the week after my grandma passed away, I was doing laundry with my daughter playing next to me on the floor. As a nickname, I sometimes call her Mama's baby girl, or baby girl. She was chatting to me, and I asked her if she was Mama's baby girl. She usually replies, "I'm Mama's baby girl," but this time, she replied, "I'm Grandma's baby girl," with a big smile on her face. I was completely astonished. She had never brought my grandma up or referred to her, especially without me talking about her first. I know that these and my numerous other teeny experiences, the kind I usually write off as coincidence or ignorance altogether, are incredibly common, but I'm curious to see where my daughter's gift goes, especially when she develops the vocabulary to express the things she sees. I just hope diligently that she doesn't outgrow her gift and discount her senses or second guess her experiences as well as we all do. When we question and doubt the credibility of our senses, we rob ourselves of the experiences we all are anxious to have. We know it's there, but it's the fear of the unknown which protects our minds from it. It's always hard to wrap your mind around things that have always been just stories or make-believe. Children have no preconceived notions and just see what they see. I feel like I want to see, but I'm scared, and this definitely holds me back. Ignorance is bliss, right? I'm writing to you because I stumbled across your website and found some stories of hauntings at Norwich University. My brother and I attended Norwich, and I can tell you without a doubt that there are ghosts at Norwich University. Norwich is a military college, and most of the stories regarding the ghosts stem around the environment only found in a military environment. Alumni Hall is one of the dormitories on the Norwich campus. It is the oldest dorm located on the upper parade ground. The bottom floor of the Alumni Hall used to be a stable area during the time when muted cavalry was still in the military. The stable areas used to be a popular place for hazing at the university, and it is believed that the hauntings may be related to hazing event in which a student died. There is also a room that is blocked off in Alumni Hall. Some people believe that this room was blocked off after students in consecutive years permanently discarded themselves in that room. I have researched articles relating to that at the university and have come up empty-handed. I lived in the bottom floor of Alumni Hall my senior year. For unexplainable reasons, books would fall off the shelves, doorknobs would rattle, and doors would slam shut. I never saw a spirit, but constantly had the feeling someone in my room uninvited. My roommate and I both felt this feeling, on our own, and also while we were in the room together. Champlain Hall's reported to have a ghost as well. Norwich, like other universities, used to have tunnels between buildings to allow students to travel back and forth without being exposed to the harsh winter weather. Champlain Hall is the last building with evidence of these tunnels. There is a bricked up entrance to the tunnels in the darkroom. The popular belief is that a student by the name of Lawrence Stillman was killed in the tunnels during initiation into a secret organization called the Skull and Swords. Sightings of spirits and strange happenings have dwindled since Champlain Hall was removed in the mid-90s. Students have also reported hearing horses at night on the upper parade ground. I hope this helps. I would love to know if any further research has been done on Norwich. Hello, Phantom of Darknesses! I don't know why I said that, but I'm gonna talk in this voice, so please leave a like on this video. We're getting closer and closer to 30k, and I can't do it without your support. I love you guys, and this is the radio of the gods speaking at you right now. Yeah. No, but really guys, thank you so much. And please leave a like, share the video, like I said, make the algorithm like me, comment below and tell me your favorite video, because this video is a doozy. Thank you guys, I really appreciate all your support,